The transit ship hummed in that low, gut-deep way that made human teeth itch. Marin Call sat in seat 4A, always 4A, always the aisle, always closest to the exit, and read the same message for the 5th time. Your discretion, our trust. 6 words from the Secretary General of Earth. No instructions, no strategy brief, no good luck or don't screw this up. Just the leash and the knife, handed over in the same sentence. She put the tablet down, picked it up, read it again. Her aide, a young man named Petrov, who still ironed his collar for diplomatic functions, leaned across the narrow aisle. Standard censure hearing, he said, like he was reading a weather forecast. 30 minutes, maybe 40. We present our navigation logs, cite precedent, absorb the reprimand, go home. Call looked at him. She had a way of looking at people that wasn't aggressive, wasn't cold, just thorough. Like she was reading the parts they hadn't written yet. Pack for 3 days, she said. Petrov blinked. It's a censure hearing. Pack for 3 days. The Concord Citadel sat at the gravitational center of nothing important, which was the point. A neutral station the size of a small moon, built by species that had been negotiating the price of starlight while humans were still arguing about whose god liked them best. The architecture announced this history in every surface. Ceilings vaulted 40 meters high, comfortable for the Thalvesi, reasonable for the Dreth, and deeply, quietly oppressive for any species under 2 meters tall. Call walked through the main corridor and felt the gravity shift. Galactic standard. 0.3% heavier than Earth normal. Just enough to make her knees ache by evening. Just enough to slow her step, so she'd always arrive half a beat behind every other delegate. No one admitted this was intentional. Call had stopped believing things were unintentional about 20 years ago. Her delegation filled a single transport pod. 7 people. 3 diplomats, 2 legal specialists, 1 communications officer, and Petrov, who was technically an aide, but functionally a human encyclopedia of Concord procedural law. 7. The Dreth Combine had brought 112 to their last routine session. The Yanari Collective traveled with a choir. 7 humans in a station built for giants. The quarters assigned to Earth's delegation sat on the 47th sublevel, residential, comfortable, and precisely as far from the council chamber as architecture allowed without being openly insulting. Call unpacked her single bag while Petrov ran through the schedule, and she was half listening when she saw the welcome gifts on the table. A small potted plant, clearly synthetic, the kind of thing you'd buy at a fuel station. A bowl of fruit that had never been alive. And a book. She picked it up. A children's picture book. Colorful pages, simple drawings. Animals of Earth, a guide for young explorers. A cartoon elephant smiled from the cover, with the blank friendliness of something designed by someone who had never seen an elephant and didn't particularly care to. Petrov stopped talking. Call held the book. It was light, glossy pages, the kind of thing you'd leave in a guest room for a child. She set it on the nightstand, spine facing out, and went back to unpacking. "Ma'am," Petrov said. "Schedule." And he continued, and neither of them mentioned the book again. 800 kilometers above the Citadel, in a military station that Earth maintained under a defense-sharing agreement nobody on the Council took seriously, Commander Roan Decker watched the diplomatic feed on a screen he'd bolted to the wall himself because the station's standard mounts didn't fit human displays. The censure hearing was tomorrow. His officers treated it like background noise, another round of Earth getting its hand slapped while the elder speakers smiled their various kinds of smiles. Lieutenant Cho made a joke about Call taking another one for the team. A few people laughed. Decker didn't. He was looking at a secondary display, fleet positioning data, updated every 90 seconds, showing every Earth vessel within 3 jump sectors of the Citadel. He pulled up a comm interface, typed nothing, closed it, opened it again. His XO, a woman named Farah who had known Decker long enough to read his silences like sheet music, locked over. Something wrong? No. You're staring at fleet positions for a censure hearing. I stare at fleet positions for breakfast. Farah didn't push it. She'd learned that Decker's worry looked exactly like his calm, which looked exactly like his anger, which looked exactly like Tuesday. The man had one face. He used it for everything. Decker closed the fleet display. Then, after Farah walked away, he opened it again. The night before the hearing, Call couldn't sleep. This was not unusual. She hadn't slept well off-world since her first Concord session 23 years ago, when a Thalvesi delegate had patted her on the head, literally, physically patted her on the head, and told her that Earth's enthusiasm was refreshing. She'd smiled, thanked him. Gone back to her quarters and sat on the floor for 40 minutes. 23 years. She'd attended every session since. Smiled through trade restrictions that gutted Earth's off-world economy. Nodded politely when the Concord voted, without Earth's input, to limit human colony expansion for ecological balance. Wrote formal thank you notes when the technology sharing embargo was renewed for the 9th consecutive cycle. She kept a file, not an official one, personal, a document she'd started her second year on the Citadel and never stopped updating. Every slight, every closed-door vote, every species that looked through her like she was furniture. 1,100 pages. She opened it now, in the dark of her quarters, scrolled to the end, and added a new entry. Welcome gifts. Children's book. 47th sub-level quarters. She closed the file. Stared at the ceiling. The synthetic plant on the table caught the dim light and threw a shadow shaped like nothing at all. Tomorrow, she would walk into the council chamber. 7 humans in a room of thousands. She would be calm. She would be prepared. She would smile. The council chamber opened like a throat. Call walked in, and the scale of it hit her the way it always did. Not the height, not the width, but the sound. 2,000 delegations, each murmuring in their own language, their own frequency, creating a wall of noise that wasn't loud, but was everywhere, inside the bones, behind the eyes. Her delegation took their seats, 7 chairs in a row, built for bodies wider than theirs. Call sat, adjusted the translator in her ear, and folded her hands. The chamber did not go silent for her arrival. The murmur continued, unbroken, the way a river continues over a small stone. She folded her hands tighter. Vorentai entered from the speaker's arch, his bioluminescence casting pale blue light across the nearest delegations. Tall, steady, old in the way that mountains are old, not crumbling, just patient. He took his place at the central dais, and the chamber settled, not for Call, but for him. He looked out across the assembly. His gaze passed over the Earth delegation the way a searchlight passes over open water. Brief, routine, already moving on. Call watched him not see her, and something behind her ribs, something she had carried for 23 years, something she had fed with smiles and thank you notes and the quiet act of writing things down, tightened like a wire. Vorenthai opened the session the way he opened every session, with a recitation of the Concord's founding principles that lasted 4 minutes and meant nothing. Unity, cooperation, shared destiny. Words polished so smooth by repetition they had lost all their edges. Call sat with her hands folded and listened to every one. The charges were read by a Dreth legal functionary, a squat, gray-shelled being whose voice carried the board authority of someone reading a parking ticket. Earth Patrol Vessel ECV Harlan, registry number 7741 Gamma, had entered hegemony claimed space near the Tau Ceti corridor on standard date 4412.7 without prior authorization, in violation of Concord Navigation Code 19, subsection 8, paragraph 3. Petrov had the response prepared. 7 precedents. 4 of them involved Dreth vessels doing the exact same thing with no censure. Call had reviewed them twice. Vorenthai gestured to Earth's delegation. The floor recognizes Delegate Call. She stood. The chair was too wide and too low, and standing from it always required a small, graceless push that she had learned to make look intentional. She activated her translator overlay and spoke clearly, without hurry, the way she always spoke in this chamber, like someone who knew she would not be given the floor twice. She cited the navigation logs. She cited the precedents. She noted, with the precise calm of someone reading coordinates off a star chart, that 3 of the 4 Dreth incursions she referenced had occurred in the same corridor, in the same year, with no formal proceedings initiated. The chamber received this the way it received most things from Earth, politely, distantly, the way one receives a child's book report, with an expression that said, "How nice," and meant, "Are we done?" Petrov exhaled. Then the Dreth delegate rose. Not the legal functionary. The senior delegate, a broad, armored figure named Kos Verithi, whose political career had been built on the simple principle that smaller species existed to be organized by larger ones. He didn't look at Call. He addressed the speaker's dais. The Dreth Combine formally moves to invoke Article 7, Section 41 of the Founding Charter, a civilization competency review of the species known as humanity. The murmur shifted, not louder, tighter. Petrov's hand found Call's arm under the table. She didn't look at him. She was watching Voronthai. The speaker's bioluminescence held steady. No flicker, no dimming. He'd known. He'd known before the session started. "The motion is received," Voronthai said. "Supporting statements may proceed." They'd rehearsed it. That was the thing Call understood within the first 30 seconds. This wasn't a reaction. It was a performance. The Dreth delegate spoke for 6 minutes about behavioral patterns inconsistent with galactic citizenship. The Ynnari delegate followed with a presentation on biological aggression markers endemic to human neurology. The Asuar representative, a towering insectoid who rarely spoke in open session, delivered a 3-minute statement about Earth's dependency on competitive hierarchies that was so perfectly structured it had clearly been written by someone else. Each speech landed with the dull, practiced weight of a hammer that had been swung before the nail was placed. Call sat through all of it. Her face did the thing it always did in these chambers. Nothing. Her hands stayed folded. Her breathing stayed even. Petrov beside her had gone the color of old paper. The Ynnari delegate was not finished. A holographic sphere the size of a building flickered to life above the chamber's center, and Earth's history began to play. Selected pieces. A curation. Hiroshima, rendered in light. Trenches at the Somme. Smoke rising from industrial stacks. A forest burning. A child standing in rubble. Rows of weapons, each generation more efficient than the last. The footage had been edited with the care of a prosecution. Every image chosen not for accuracy, but for impact, stripped of context, arranged to tell a single story. This species is broken and has always been broken. 2,000 delegations watched. Call watched too. She watched her species' worst moments projected on a screen the size of a city block, while she sat in a chair built for a body larger than hers, in a room where the gravity made her bones ache, surrounded by 7 people who were the only humans within 100 light years. She did not look away. She watched it all the way through, and when the last image faded, a mushroom cloud dissolving into the holographic dark, she was still sitting in the same position, hands folded, breathing even. Voronthai spoke. Earth's delegation may respond. Call stood. The graceless push, the translator, the floor. The chamber waited. 2,000 species, thousands of eyes and eye equivalents and sensory organs that served the same purpose, all pointed at one human woman, standing in a room designed to make her feel exactly as small as she was. She said nothing. 1 second, 3, 5, 7, 11. 11 seconds of silence in a room that had never been silent for her before. The murmur didn't return. Something in the quality of her stillness held it at bay. Not authority, not power, just the simple, unnerving fact of a person who had been handed a microphone and chosen not to use it. When she spoke, her voice was the same as always, clear, not loud. Is the council finished, or would you also like to review our poetry? The words landed in the silence and sat there. Nobody laughed. The translator systems carried the sentence to 2,000 delegations in 2,000 languages, and in every single one of them, it meant exactly the same thing. You have shown me everything you have. I am still standing here. Vorenthai's light dimmed. Just a fraction, just for a moment. He recovered, but the Falvesi delegation noticed, and noticing made them uneasy, because Vorenthai's light had not dimmed in open session in 40 years. The council thanks the delegate, he said. A vote on the competency review will be held at dawn. Standard Citadel time. All delegations will register their positions in the formal record. Dawn. 14 hours. One small dip of the head. That could have been respect, could have been acknowledgement, could have been the way a person bows before they pick up something heavy. She turned and walked out of the chamber. 7 humans following 1. The doors closed behind them, with the soft pressurized hiss of a system designed by species that valued quiet exits. Petrov waited until they were in the corridor. What do we do? Your job, Call said. I'll do mine. She kept walking. Her stride was even. Her back was straight. Her aide did not mention that her hands, now that they were no longer folded on the table, no longer visible to the chamber, no longer part of the performance, were shaking. 800 kilometers above the Citadel, Commander Roan Decker watched the feed cut to the Concord's holding screen, a rotating emblem of galactic unity that meant nothing to him and never had. His officers were loud. Lieutenant Cho was swearing in 2 languages. The communications officer was already drafting a protest statement that nobody would read. Decker was quiet. He opened a comm channel. Not 1 channel, 4. 4 separate military stations, each positioned at a different jump point within strike range of the Citadel sector. He spoke 5 words. Hold position. Await sundown. He closed the channel. Farah appeared at his shoulder. What did you just send? Nothing yet. Roan? I told them to wait. He looked at her. That one face, the same one he used for everything. Breakfast, briefings, and the slow, precise work of preparing for something he hoped he wouldn't have to do. That's all anyone's doing right now. Waiting. On the secondary display, fleet positions updated. Green dots in the dark. Decker watched them, and he waited too. 14 hours is a long time when you cannot sleep and the gravity is wrong, and every corridor in the station smells like ozone and something floral that no human nose was built to process. Call worked. She started with the Pelinari, a mid-tier species with 3 votes on the council, and a shipping agreement with Earth that kept their southern colonies fed through winter cycles. The Pelinari ambassador met her in a trade lounge on the 31st sublevel, a place designed for quiet conversations between species that didn't want to be seen having quiet conversations. He was sympathetic. He used that word 4 times. Sympathetic. He was also unwilling to vote against the Dreth, whose cargo fleet controlled the only trade lane between Pelinari space and the galactic core. You understand, he said. I do, Call said. She recorded the conversation, logged it, moved on. An old species. Philosophical. Fond of long pauses and indirect language. Their delegate met Call in a corridor between sessions and spoke for 20 minutes about the importance of measured response and historical patience, and the way that time reveals the wisdom of restraint. When Call asked directly whether the Selen would oppose the review, the delegate touched her arm, a gesture of intimacy in their culture, and said, "We will remember Earth kindly." Call thanked her, logged it, moved on. By the 4th hour, the pattern was clear. Nobody was going to help. Not because they disagreed with Earth's position. Several delegates said openly that Article 7 was being misused, that the Dreth had orchestrated the whole thing, that the competency review was a political tool dressed in legal clothing. They knew. Everyone knew. Knowing changed nothing. The Dreth controlled shipping lanes. The Ynnari controlled pharmaceutical patents. The Asuar controlled rare mineral extraction rights in 6 systems. Together, the 3 of them held enough economic leverage to make opposition expensive in ways that most species could not afford. So they were sympathetic. They were understanding. They would remember Earth kindly, and they would vote yes or sit on their hands while the vote passed. Call logged every conversation, every name, every refusal, every sideways glance and careful choice of words. She was not just looking for allies anymore. She was building something else. In the 5th hour, an amphibian elder from a species Call didn't immediately recognize found her in a corridor. Small, mottled skin, the color of wet stone. He walked with the careful steps of someone whose joints had been aching for a very long time. Delegate Call. Yes, I am Torvun. My species, the Modin, were reviewed once. He said the word reviewed the way you'd say a disease. There is no after. There is only what they let you keep. Call studied him. Will you speak against the vote? Torvun's wide, wet eyes didn't blink. His species couldn't blink, but something in them shifted, like a light going out behind glass. I came to tell you what I know. That is all I can give. He turned and walked away, slow and careful, and Call stood in the corridor and watched him go, and did not allow herself the luxury of anger. Not yet. Anger was a resource, and she was rationing. She logged the conversation, added a note. Moden, reviewed under Ynnari biological stability protocols, forced sterilization of outer colonies. No formal record in Concord archives. Then she kept walking. In the 8th hour, Vorenthai came to her quarters. He filled the doorway the way Thalvesi filled every doorway. Not with aggression, just with the simple physical fact of being very large in a space built for someone smaller. His bioluminescence cast pale blue light on the walls, soft and steady, the way a nightlight would work if nightlights were 8 feet tall and had diplomatic immunity. Delegate Call, may I enter? It wasn't a question. She stepped aside. He sat, which for a Thalvesi meant folding at angles that human furniture could not support, so he lowered himself to the floor with a grace that would have been beautiful if Call had been in the mood to find things beautiful. I have come to offer an alternative. She sat across from him. The children's book on her nightstand caught his eye. He looked away from it too fast. Good. He should. Earth may accept a voluntary sovereignty reduction, Vorenthai said. This would avoid the public vote. Your status would be adjusted to Protectorate Observer, limited self-governance, continued trade access, military operations supervised by a Concord-appointed body. His light pulsed gently, a rhythm that in Thalvesi body language conveyed sincerity. This is not punishment. This is a path that preserves dignity. Call listened. She let him finish. She let the silence after he finished stretch for a few seconds longer than comfortable, because she had learned a long time ago that silence after a proposal tells you more about the proposer than the proposal itself. Vorenthai held the silence well. His light stayed steady. Call asked one question. When the Pelori were reviewed 60 years ago, how long did their limited self-governance last before the Dreth absorbed their colonies? The light flickered. That situation was 4 years, Call said. 4 years of protectorate status, and then the Dreth reclassified their space as economically integrated territory, and the Pelori delegation was dissolved. It's not in the Concord's formal record, but it is in mine. The movement was slow, and for the first time, Call saw something in it that wasn't grace. It was the careful motion of someone rearranging their certainty. I came in good faith, he said. I know, Call said. That's the problem. He left. His light didn't flicker again, but it was dimmer going out than it had been coming in, and Call noticed, because noticing was what she did. It was all she'd ever been allowed to do. She closed the door, opened her file, added the conversation. 1,106 pages. 800 kilometers above, Decker was doing something he had not been asked to do and would not apologize for. Earth's off-world fleet, 12 carrier groups, 47 support vessels, 130 fast response craft, was repositioning, not advancing, not threatening, shifting. The way a person shifts their weight from one foot to the other when they expect to be standing for a long time. The movements were small. A carrier group adjusting orbit by 2 degrees. A supply line rerouting through a less monitored corridor. A communications relay powering up in a sector where it had been dormant for 3 years. Any individual movement was meaningless. Together they formed a posture that any military strategist in the galaxy would recognize. Defensive readiness with the option to become something else very fast. Decker also did something unauthorized. He opened an unencrypted broadcast channel, the kind anyone could listen to, and transmitted Earth's complete military capability assessment. Ship counts, weapons systems, personnel numbers, response times. All of it, in plain language, in every galactic standard format. Not as a threat. Threats were for species that needed you to be afraid. This was a fact sheet, and the numbers were 3 times higher than any Concord intelligence estimate had predicted, because Earth had spent 40 years being underestimated and had never once corrected the error. Until now. In the 12th hour, Call sat alone. The station's night cycle had dimmed the lights, and her quarters had the gray underwater quality of a room that was pretending it was nighttime. She opened her file, scrolled to the beginning, read entries she'd written 20 years ago, small, precise notes about small, precise humiliations. A vote she wasn't told about, a treaty clause rewritten overnight, a Dreth trade official who had referred to Earth's delegation as the children's table. She scrolled to the end, added one final entry. Then she opened a new document and began to write. A cover letter. First line. To whoever reads this after we are gone, or after we have made ourselves impossible to ignore. Then she saved it, closed the file, and called her daughter. The connection took 8 minutes. Citadel relays, almost certainly monitored. Her daughter's face appeared on the screen, sleepy, confused by the hour. Mom, are you okay? I'm fine, I just wanted to hear your voice. Mom, are we in trouble? The question sat between them, carried across light years by technology built by species that thought humans were children. Go outside tonight, Call said. Look at the stars. They're the same ones. The line cut. Relay timeout. Call sat in the dark for a while, in a chair that was too wide, in a room that smelled like someone else's flowers. Then she stood, straightened her collar, walked back into the corridor. The council chamber, at dawn, looked the same as it had 14 hours ago. Same vaulted ceilings, same murmur. Same 2,000 delegations, arranged in concentric tiers, like an amphitheater built by a species that believed size was the same thing as authority. Call entered carrying a data tablet, and nothing else. Petrov walked behind her. He had not slept either, and it showed. His collar was still ironed, but the man inside it had crumpled. He'd spent the night running numbers, counting votes, searching for the mathematical miracle that would make the math work. The math did not work. He knew it. Call knew it. She'd known it 6 hours ago. She hadn't told him. Letting him search had kept him useful, and kept him from thinking about what came next. They took their seats. 7 humans, same chairs, same row. His light was steady. But Call had been watching Thalvesi bioluminescence for 2 decades, and she could see the color had shifted, A fraction bluer, a fraction cooler. Stress response. He was managing it well, not well enough. Before the vote proceeds, Voronthai said, Earth's delegation is granted a final address. Delegate call. She stood. The push, the translator, the floor. She did not look at her tablet. She did not look at Petrov. She looked at the chamber. The whole thing, all of it, the sheer scale of the room and the thousands of beings who filled it. And she began to speak. 14 hours ago, this council showed my species its own history. You projected our wars, our famines, our weapons, our failures. Her voice carried the same measured tone it always carried, but something underneath it had changed, a tightness in the low notes, like a wire pulled one turn past comfortable. You presented this as evidence that humanity is unfit for full participation in galactic civilization. She paused. Not for drama, for aim. You were right about the facts. Everything you showed was real. We did those things. We burned our own world. We killed each other in numbers that your analysts had to invent new charts to display. We built weapons capable of ending ourselves, and then built more. The chamber was quiet, not the polite quiet of disinterest, a different kind. But you made an error in your interpretation. You showed this council a species that has practiced surviving every way a civilization can be broken. War, famine, plague, self-destruction, and the long, slow violence of being told by everyone around them that they do not belong. She stopped. Let the sentence sit. Let 2,000 translators carry it. And you read that as weakness. Cos Verithes sat in his armored bulk, wide and gray and unblinking. Let me correct the record. That is not our shame. That is our resume. The word resume landed differently in different languages. Some translators rendered it as credentials, others as proof of survival. In the Mohaden language, the language of Torvun, the elder who had found her in a corridor and given her the only honest thing anyone had given her in 14 hours, the translator produced a word that meant scars shown to prove a hunt survived. Call did not know this. But Torvun, sitting in the upper tiers with his whetstone skin and his aching joints, heard it, and his hands, all four of them, went still. Call shifted. Her tone did not change, but the direction did. The way a river doesn't change speed when it turns, but the force against the bank doubles. I'd like to read something into the formal record. She activated her tablet. The data transmitted, not to the central display, but directly to every delegation system simultaneously. 2,000 screens lit up. On Galactic Standard Date 4371.2, the Concord authorized the Yanari Collective to implement biological stability protocols on the Moden homeworlds. These protocols included the forced sterilization of 3 outer colonies. No vote was held. No review was conducted. The Moden population in affected regions declined by 61% within 1 generation. Silence. The kind that has weight. On date 4389.5, the Dreth Combine completed the economic integration of Pelori sovereign space, 4 years after a competency review reduced Pelori's status to Protectorate Observer. The integration was not voted on. It was filed as paperwork. Point of order. On date 4402.1, the Ossuar entered a bilateral resource agreement with the Selen that transferred mineral rights in 6 systems without Selen legislative approval. Under a clause introduced during a Concord session the Selen delegation was not informed of. Point of order. Call kept reading. Not louder, not faster. The same pace, the same tone. A shipping manifest. A list of things that happened to species that were too small to stop them and too polite to say so. Voronthai's light was flickering, not the gentle pulse of sincerity, a sharp, irregular strobe that the Thalvesi would recognize as distress. He did not call for order. Some part of him, the part that was old enough to remember when the Concord had meant what its founding words said, did not stop her. Call finished. She set the tablet down. "You are welcome to vote," she said. "You are welcome to reduce Earth's sovereignty. I will not beg. I will not threaten. But I want this council to understand something." She held up the tablet. 1,100 pages. 40 years. Earth has been keeping score. The file transmitted. Every delegation received it. 1,100 pages of dates, names, conversations, refusals, slights, structural inequities, legal violations, and the quiet, patient record of a species that had been told to sit down and had sat down and had written everything in the margins while it waited. Voronthai called the vote. It passed. 1,447 in favor, 312 against, 600 abstentions. Earth's sovereignty was formally downgraded to provisional membership, pending a full competency review to be conducted by a Concord-appointed committee. The chamber filled with the low hum of formal business concluding. Delegations murmured. Data systems logged the result. The machinery of galactic governance did what it always did. It processed. Call sat down. She did not leave, did not protest, did not stand in dramatic silence or make a final statement. She sat in her too-wide chair and folded her hands and looked straight ahead. And Petrov, who had been holding his breath since the vote was called, finally exhaled and turned to her and said, "What now?" Call typed a message on her tablet. One line. Sent it. "It's done. Proceed with sundown." Voronthai watched from the dais. He had chaired votes before, hundreds of them. He had watched delegates lose and leave, some with anger, some with grace, some with the broken shuffle of people who had believed in a system that had just shown them its teeth. He had never watched someone lose and stay. Call sat there, hands folded, face neutral. A person who had just been told she was less than, that her species was less than, officially by a margin of over 1,000 votes, and she had not moved. Something in Voronthai's chest, a biological structure that served the same function as a human gut, tightened. He had studied enough species to know what surrender looked like. Defiance, grief, rage. He had categories for all of them. This was none of those. This was a woman who had just been caged and was not thrashing. His light dimmed. It did not recover for the rest of the session, and when his aide asked if he was unwell, he said he was fine. He was not fine. He was beginning to understand something, but the understanding was still forming, still taking shape in the deep, slow way that Dalvesi processed fear, not as a spike, but as a tide, rising so gradually you didn't notice your feet were wet until the water was at your knees. On the military station, Decker received the message. He read it once, did not read it again. There was nothing in it he hadn't expected. He opened a comm channel, not to his fleet, to Earth. Every government, every military installation, every colonial outpost, every human being with a receiver within broadcast range. One word. Sundown. He closed the channel, stood up, put on his jacket. Farah looked at him. What happens now? Decker walked to the viewport. Below, the citadel turned in the slow, massive way that artificial moons turn, a monument to cooperation, built by species that had forgotten what the word cost. Now, he said, they find out what they bought. It started with the doctors. 3 hours after the vote, every human medical professional stationed at joint Concord facilities submitted simultaneous resignation notices, formatted perfectly, filed through proper channels, citing the precise legal clause that released provisional status species from service obligations. 14 trauma surgery teams, 26 emergency response units, 41 long-term care specialists embedded in stations across 9 sectors. The notices arrived on the same minute, to the second. The Keth medical station in the Harun corridor was the first to feel it. A Keth child, 6 years old, or the equivalent, had been scheduled for a neural bridge procedure that only 2 surgeons in the sector could perform. Both were human. Both were already on transit ships heading home. The Keth station director sent an emergency request to the Concord Medical Board. The board said they would assign replacements. The estimated wait time was 11 months. The child's procedure could not wait 11 months. That was the first crack. Small, personal, easy to dismiss as an isolated case, a scheduling problem, a logistical wrinkle that would smooth itself out. The Concord's administrative systems were designed for wrinkles. They had forms for this. Then the engineers left. Earth had been maintaining shared infrastructure across 30 systems under cooperation agreements that nobody had read carefully because nobody had needed to. The humans just showed up and kept things running. Water processing on the Dreth agricultural colonies, atmospheric regulators on 2 Yenari stations, navigation buoy networks in 4 contested sectors that every species used and no species claimed responsibility for. The humans filed their departure notices. Same clause, same format, same minute. Within 6 hours, the navigation buoys in the Tassari corridor went dark. Not destroyed, just off, unpowered. The Concord's own ships had been routing through those buoys for so long that the backup navigation protocols hadn't been updated in 12 years. 3 cargo convoys dropped out of faster-than-light travel to recalculate routes manually. One of them was carrying medical supplies to the Keth. The cascade was not dramatic. That was the thing. There were no explosions, no declarations of war, no fleets in battle formation burning across the sky. There was just absence. A thing that had been there, quietly, invisibly, for 40 years, and was now not there, and the shape of the hole it left was bigger than anyone had imagined, because no one had ever bothered to measure it. The agricultural shipments stopped next. Earth-origin grain strains, modified over decades for alien soil chemistry, distributed to 36 systems under trade agreements that were now legally void. The Dreth colony on Verith 4, the one that Cos Verithi represented in the council, received a polite notification that their soil remediation contract had been terminated per standard dissolution protocols. The notification was 3 pages long. It cited 14 subsections. It was, in every way that mattered, a piece of paperwork. Verithi read it in his quarters, and the document cracked in his grip because he was holding it too hard. The Concord's communication network was next. This one hurt in a way the Council hadn't expected because they hadn't known it was vulnerable. 40% of Concord interstellar communications routed through relay infrastructure that Earth had built, maintained, and upgraded, as a courtesy, for 28 years. The relays were not Concord property. They were Earth property, operated under a service agreement that had just been voided by the sovereignty downgrade. That would have been an act of aggression. Instead, they simply stopped maintaining them. Within 9 hours, latency on Concord channels increased by 400%. Messages that had taken seconds now took minutes. Real-time communication between council delegations became unreliable. Vorontai sat in his private office and pulled the data. He pulled it slowly because the data systems were lagging now, and each query took longer than the last, and the irony of this was not lost on him, even though irony was not a concept the Thalvesi had a native word for. The numbers told a story he had never read. Earth's integration into the galactic infrastructure was not political. It was structural. 40 years of junior membership, and humanity had threaded itself into the boring, essential, invisible systems that made civilization function. The systems that elder species considered beneath them. Medicine, agriculture, logistics, Communications. Emergency response. Sanitation on 3 stations. Pest control on 7. Translation services. Navigation. The work that nobody noticed until it stopped. Earth hadn't conquered the galaxy. Earth had made itself the plumbing. And someone had just turned off the water. Vorenthai's light was out. Not dimmed. Out. His aide stood in the doorway, afraid to enter, because a Thalvesi whose bioluminescence had fully extinguished was a Thalvesi in a state that their language described as deep recognition, the moment when the body understands something the mind has been refusing. Elder species began contacting Call's delegation. The Selene, who would remember Earth kindly. The Pelinari, who had been so sympathetic. Species that had abstained. Species that had voted yes with discomfort. Species that had voted yes without discomfort, and were now discovering what discomfort felt like. Nobody reached Call. Her delegation's quarters were empty. Cleaned out. Beds made. Surfaces wiped. The synthetic plant had been left on the table, and the bowl of fake fruit, and the children's picture book, untouched on the nightstand. On the book, a sticky note. Call's handwriting. Neat and small, the way she did everything. You can keep this. Vorenthai found her on the transit dock. Her ship was loaded. Her delegation was aboard. She stood at the threshold, and she was not waiting for him. She was waiting for the door to cycle. But when she saw him, she didn't step through. She gave him that. One last moment of the courtesy she had practiced for 23 years. Delegate Call. His voice was wrong. Something in it had loosened, like a bolt that had been holding a structure together, and had just realized it was the only one. This can be negotiated. The Council can revisit. The Council voted, Call said. Earth's sovereignty has been reduced. We accept the ruling. Then stay. Work within. A reduced species has no obligation to maintain the infrastructure of its superiors. She looked at him. Not the diplomatic look. Not the measured, careful, nothing face she had worn in every session for 2 decades. She looked at him, the way you look at someone when you are done pretending. You'll find that in your own charter. Section 12, paragraph 4. She paused. I checked. Vorenthai's light came back. Just barely. A faint, cold glow that was nothing like the warm pulse he'd carried into her quarters the night before, with his compromise and his kindness and his certainty that hierarchy was mercy. You planned this, he said. Not an accusation, a recognition. Call didn't answer the question. She looked at him for one more second, long enough for him to see that there was no anger in her face, no triumph, no satisfaction, just the exhaustion of a woman who had spent 40 years sitting in chairs that didn't fit, and smiling at people who didn't see her, and writing things down in a file that was now 1,100 pages of proof that patience is not the same as forgiveness. She stepped through the door. The ship left the Citadel dock without ceremony. No broadcast, no parting message, just the quiet, mechanical process of a vessel detaching from a station that had never been designed to hold it comfortably. Across the galaxy, the withdrawal continued. Forms were filed, contracts were terminated. Every treaty, every trade agreement, every mutual obligation that the Concord had bound Earth to for 40 years was systematically, legally, and irreversibly voided. Not by Earth's unilateral action, but by the Concord's own ruling. The sovereignty reduction that was meant to cage humanity had unlocked every door. Because Call's legal team had been mapping those doors for years, tracing every clause and every loophole, and the 1,100-page file wasn't just a record of grievances, it was a key. Decker's fleet held position. 12 carrier groups in perfect formation, broadcasting capability assessments on an open channel, visible to every scanner in the sector. Not a threat, a fact. The kind of fact that makes you reconsider whether the thing you just did was wise. Not a shot was fired. Not a single weapon was armed. The fleet simply existed, large and quiet and patient, the way Earth had always existed in this galaxy, present, underestimated, and keeping score. In the council chamber, an emergency session dissolved into shouting. Delegations that had voted yes were demanding revotes. Delegations that had abstained were claiming they had been coerced. The Dreth delegation was silent, which was worse than shouting, because the Dreth were never silent unless they were calculating. Voronthai sat in the empty chamber after everyone left. The holographic sphere still displayed Call's file, all 1,100 pages, still transmitted to every system, still available for anyone to read. He reached out to dismiss it. His hand stopped. He read the cover letter. To whoever reads this after we are gone, or after we have made ourselves impossible to ignore. His light went out again. When it returned, the color was different, shifted toward a frequency that Thalvesi associated with grief. Though Voronthai would not have called it that. He would have called it understanding. Because understanding and grief, for a species old enough to remember its own mistakes, are often the same thing. The kind of silence that is not empty, but full of the absence of a species that had been here, and had been small, and had been quiet, and was now gone. Somewhere in the dark between stars, Marin Calls slept. For the first time in 41 hours, in a bunk on a transit ship, with the gravity set to Earth normal, and the hum of engines tuned to a frequency that didn't make her teeth itch. On the small table beside her bunk, a picture her daughter had drawn at 6 years old. A blue circle, brown and green smudges, Earth rendered by a child who had never seen it from space and loved it anyway. Below the drawing, in a child's handwriting, "Come home soon." Call slept with the light on. She always had. And behind her, growing smaller in the viewport, the citadel turned in the dark, a monument to unity, built by species that had forgotten what the word cost, learning now, in the silence Earth left behind, the price